How's everyone doing? It is not beautiful outside. It's all good. We're in here together. It's a gorgeous day everywhere, but it's so wonderful to see so many of you here to spend this afternoon with us. I am just here quickly to welcome you to YBCA. Really, really glad to have all of you. I think if I ask the question, how many people have been here before, we're going to see a lot of hands go up. Let's try it. Yay. So this is YBCA. We're in our 25th year as an organization. I think of YBCA as San Francisco's Center for Art and Progress, Center for Art and Civic Life. I like to say art and, because I think we are an organization that is really, really interested in exploring the role that art plays in the life of our community, the role that art and artists play in making change in the world. Our mission is to generate culture that moves people, and what we mean by that, we're very inspired by one of our board members, Jeff Chang, who talks a lot about how culture often precedes change, culture often precedes policy, and in fact, if we have culture shift, we might arrive at lasting policy change and lasting change. And we want to believe that art centers of all shapes and sizes, no matter where they are in this country, can be at the center of cultural change. And what we are trying to do here is center the artist as the absolute essential component of any change that will last in this country. So we're here to do that, and we are obviously very inspired by the artists and the leaders that have paved the way for us. Suzanne Lacy, definitely one of the pioneering artists who has set a pathway for so many of us, and we're so thrilled to be able to do this exhibition with SFMOMA. I would argue that Suzanne's work is bigger than an exhibition in both institutions, and I'm just really pleased that we're able to at least get started in understanding and celebrating the work. So you have an afternoon, you guys agree? The curators down here in the front. That was funny. Anyway, you guys have an afternoon ahead of you where we're really looking at youth engagement, at social practice, and at where we are now and where we can go together. And I can think of no better group of people to have that conversation than the people you have here with you today. It is my pleasure to introduce to you one of the curators of the exhibition, the former director of the visual arts here at YBCA, and the current director of Laboratorio Arte Alameda in Mexico City, Lucía Sanromán.
Okay. I have been quite nervous about returning to give these so-called keynotes, so that may mean that it's going to be a little meandering. And the light is pretty intense on the eyes, but let me see you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you especially. I want to make a special effort to thank Deborah Cullinan, because everything I'm going to be talking about today would not have been possible if she hadn't been crazy enough to hire me in the first place in 2015. At least for me, it has been a formative 3 years, an intensely experimental 3 years, where we have, as a group, the YBCA, with our colleagues, my colleagues, Rudolph Freeling and Dominic Wilson, with Suzanne, and many artists, with Unique, and many people who are here today, we have really done things that felt often uncomfortable and where we didn't often know what the outcome was going to be. And as an institution, YBCA, when I came in 2015, had this a great deal of openness to thinking of many different ways by which this notion of the artist as an agent of civic change, but not only the artist, further than the artist, other people who participate in culture in various ways can, in fact, develop strategies for policy, thinking about policy, for thinking about the way that one behaves and functions in society, for thinking about representation and so on. And so thank you, Deborah, very much for that. And I wanted also to start with this piece, which is at SFMOMA, which is Suzanne Lacy's hand-tinted photograph. One part that we have now today. Suzanne, turn your phone off. Whisper the winds, the waves. Whisper the winds, the waves, or I always say it the other way. Anyway, this piece, which was produced in 1985 in La Jolla Shores, was really important to me because when I was working as assistant curator, then associate curator at Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, which has one of its campuses is in La Jolla, right next to where this cove lies, I was doing an exhibition of photography from the collection, which I focused on feminist photographers. And I went through the collection and found this box of photos that had not been presented before. They were still in their box, and it happened to be this project. And I was very surprised and I was kind of confused by them. Because as a person living at the border for a few years then, I hadn't really seen this kind of work before. I had come from a very traditional art historical background. I went to a traditional art historical school in Canada. I was a painter before that. And I hadn't seen work that so tested the limits of what the art form could be or would be. Of course, we had the evidence of the photographs, and we had the evidence of what it implied, that there was some kind of choreography here, that there was a space, a use of public space. Including in the portfolio is a description of some part of the piece, and then I later learned that the portfolio was made for fundraising. But I was lucky to have a friend who introduced me to the artist. I needed more information, and Suzanne was extremely enthusiastic and put the thing in the back of her car, in a huge crate, and brought it to show me, which we couldn't open it because it was crated. And I was like, no, we're not opening that. I don't have the capacity as a registrar. I'm not a licensed registrar. So we didn't open it, but we did we did a different presentation of that project. And so I present that today as a start because it's part of my kind of, one of the ways in which I come into starting to think about what it means to do socially engaged practice or social practice, or as you used to call it, new genre public art. I was also lucky at the time to be living in Tijuana, San Diego, to be myself an immigrant, to be able to kind of have this possibility of imagining to belong to two or more things at the same time, to be amphibious, which is a term that is now used quite often to describe these kinds of practices that exist in the art world, but also have absolutely legitimate and powerful existences outside of the art world. This capacity to be multivalent in a real way, not only have a force symbolically, but also operate in other ways. Very slowly started to unpack what this piece had actually done in 1985 in La Jolla, which was to connect a large group of elderly women who were isolated from each other, and to allow them a moment of public presence through their own voice. And so this started to this is 2006, so it's now 13 years. That the piece is older, but 13 years that I started to really be very conscious, because this comes to me when I'm a museum curator, a young museum curator, an assistant curator, then associate curator, really working very hard to be appropriate in my role as a Mexican curator in the museum at the border. You know, I had a role. And to try to think about what that meant, and to try to kind of operate that the power and the privilege that affords, while at the same time being able to myself not only be symbolic, to really open the spaces up for these practices, whatever they may be, Latino artists, Latinx artists, Mexican artists, in this kind of territory. So as I was trying to think about how to go to the next slide, I was reading some of the very wonderful reviews we've had for this show. And Sarah Holder very kindly quoted Malkia Cyril, who is an amazing organizer who started the Media Council in the 90s, which is now youth. ¿Cómo se llama, Krista? MediaJustice. Sorry, we have tracked its history on our walls. Oh, this is the clicker. I see. Thank you. And so the quote goes like this. Here I am feeling like I am treading water, trying to get these voices heard in an environment where there is no mechanism to be heard. And I realized I wanted to work on the mechanisms, not the narratives. I wanted to deal with a machine. And actually, the opportunity that Deborah afforded me as I joined the team here was to think about what it means to deal with a machine as an institutional curator here at YBCA in a really fertile environment and a friendly environment to do so. And the machine that I'm speaking of is actually not only one machine, it's several machines. It's the machine, I was very, very conscious at that moment of thinking about the machine of art history. Of course, we know that feminist practices have already opened the space up for that machine to be shaped in different ways. Also, Latin American, African, Asian historians, curators, and so on. We know that that machine of art history, which is, at least in the West, conceived monolithically as primarily white, primarily male, is already shifted and changed in various ways. But I was really thinking at the moment that one of the practices that most challenged me in thinking and was sort of very important for understanding, in any case, one of the practices that I felt was truly avant-gardist and really like at the forefront is all that falls in the rubric of social practice. And even only 3 or 4 years ago, when other curators started doing major museum exhibitions and retrospectives, particularly of socially engaged artists, we were still dealing very openly with other artists and curators and museum directors and so on being like, well, that's not art, or being, well, that should actually not necessarily exist in the realm of art, it should exist outside because it functions in other ways. So things that were in a sense correct, but also in a sense completely not just conservative, but afforded art a space of agency quite limited. And so my task, as I saw it, was to really think of this institution, this machine, YBCA, as a platform for the presentation of these kinds of practices. The second machine is a machine of art history. And then, of course, the internal machine that it takes. How do you change your own internal machine to properly not just present the work, but actually, in a sense, eventually move over and let the space that you have inhabited, which is a space of power, because I'm a curator and I happen to be kind of a white-skin, so, well, very much a white-skin. So I understand that I have a privilege to figure out ways by which I can move over and let that space be inhabited by others. And that started with a series of exhibitions, of which I actually count one, which is not here, the retrospective we presented of Lynn Hirschman-Leeson as a start, which are all under the rubric changing the ratio, which very, very simply was changing the ratio of presentation of exhibitions, with a majority being focused on women artists or female artists. And we set out, like almost crazily, to do one exhibition a year, a retrospective, in three consecutive years: Tania Bruguera, Future Farmer, Suzanne Lacy. And I would say also that my gratitude is boundless for the visual arts team here, Dorothy Davila, and everyone else, because they had no choice, essentially. So had to follow me. 5 minutes? I only have 5 minutes left? And I've gone through 2 slides? Oh, God, no. Okay, I have to hurry up. Anyway, boundless for that team, because we just sort of jumped into the universe of what that meant. So this exercise started with Tania Bruguera. And the reason why we did retrospectives, or we've done retrospectives, is simply because the retrospective is a kind of hard form. It offers edges that are clear in the lingo of art history, or in museum making, exhibition making. You look at an object particularly, and you look at a kind of chronology, and you define certain aspects of the practice by kind of looking at that chronology and making a lot of it as formal judgment, but also contextual judgment. And it's very difficult to do that with practices that have this amphibious quality, or practices that operate in the political in a powerful and real way, because they are not always defined by the form only, or by the aesthetic decisions of their makers. Tania Bruguera exhibition we put together here. This is an example I put because this, Kathleen's Whisper, which is, the exhibition was co-curated with Susie Cantor, who actually remembers and has made possible all the information and research around the pieces. This piece is important because Tania had come up with a way to present this, which included a kind of stage setting of the props of which this was part. I'm not, because I have 5 minutes, I'm not going to give you more detail. I have like 20 more slides. And this is another piece of Tanya, which is Immigrant Movement International, which is actually like a community center done under the auspices of Creative Time and Queens Museum. So what do you show in the galleries? What do you show in the galleries? And I remember going to Cuba with Susie and Tanya saying she wants nothing in the gallery, 0 objects. She just wants to have a school, and I just had like a meltdown. Like literally, it was super hot too. And I just went like, what have I done? What have I done? Very stressed out by the idea that we would have a completely empty space. And then, but in fact, we managed to put together a show that had this idea of not a restaging of the performances, but using the props in order to kind of remind us of certain elements of the performances. And it was actually a very oblique and strange experience to put together the show. And also the show itself was oblique and strange because it ended up looking a little bit like a series of empty stages where the performances themselves, which are different in kind from Suzanne's, these are political performance, which sometimes we could think of it as having a social effect, but it's political performance art, like her sort of playing Russian roulette while reading a manifesto on the role of the artist in society. This is the antisocial, totally, as opposed to your social, Suzanne. And so what happened was at the show, we worked very hard, very serious, but it felt to me extremely uncomfortable. And it felt uncomfortable because this is our space that was supposed to have these gatherings of people to talk about immigration issues, but of course people who are in the midst of immigration issues are not going to go to a museum and talk about immigration issues. Of course. But it's quite beautiful and pretty, and of course in San Francisco, most people agreed, thank God. That it wasn't good to have. And then we presented all the archival section of the show in this huge sticker and did a huge amount of research. And because Tanya was very adamantly against having the archive present as an image, so having the little papers, los papelitos as she called them, with the result that in order to get through to the installations, you had to go through this sea of words. Now, one of the things about me as a curator is that the agreement with the artist is complete. In other words, if we're going to go down in flames, we're going to go down in flames together. Because in the end, it happened. In order for me to figure out for us as a group, to figure out where the limits of this work is in terms of its possibility to be presented in a museum, to be represented in the form of the retrospective, it was important to follow through and not get scared and say, let's find a visual solution. Where is the object? Where is the art? One of the very important things that remains in the next show is that we made this amazing thing together here with many colleagues here at YBCA, La Escuela de Arte Útil, which continues to move around and grow and change and shift. And this is the empty stage of the escuela, and this is Tanya giving the first class, and this is the students. And this was a collaborative project over 8 weeks, I think. Susie will remind me. 4 hours every day, like exhausting. I actually have to tell you that I recently had an artist who came up with some crazy idea like this, and I said, I'm not doing an 8-week project that requires like 4 hours of teaching every day, sorry. Because actually, this is, in terms of the machine that takes to put together something like this within an institutional context, it really pushes the boundaries of the institution to a point that it may break, in fact. At least the energy of the team members almost breaks. And so this is important to think about sustainability. And it's also now lessons learned is that maybe in order to do this project, we probably would have had to do these other projects first in order to get to the point as an institution. I mean, I think it worked out really well and it was amazing, but in order to, as an institution, have the know-how of how to execute something as complex as this, it's like a muscle. You have to build towards it. And our institution is not just me, of course, narcissistic me, or the visual arts department. It's all the other people. It's the events department, we work together amazingly. Everyone, it's a huge number of people. And so to figure out how to not just move that ship out of aesthetic will, but out of collaborative intention is not so simple. And it's not only about convincing people or ordering them to do it. And to expand the possibility of the institution to afford the not only the time to spend on 50 people rather than the 150 that you need in order to meet your goals, right? Because it's not, I'm not saying it's not important to meet the goals of audiences. So you put all your effort into 50 people for 8 weeks, but what about the 150 you would like to have, or 200 or 300 you would like to have every day, right? So these are not just about evil art institution versus creative artist, or, you know, crazy curator pushing it through. It's real things. The economy of the art world is a real thing, and the economy of institutions is a real thing. Okay, so this was I'm going to go much faster now. This is, this is where we started with Future Farmers, the next exhibition we did. And I was telling, clearly I was exhausted from Escuela de Arte Útil. I said to Amy, I just don't want to suffer. I want to have pleasure. And so she did this little drawing. So we met with them, and they do have objects, but they were beautiful, crafted, amazing, charming, charismatic pieces, very San Francisco or West Coast. But they were in this form in their studio, Amy's studio, or sort of like that. That's one piece. And of course, I started to think about, well, what am I looking at? These are some of the drawings I made to understand how we would think of the project, other drawings, another drawing. But I will say this about this show, which is a continuation. In each of these projects, we've tried to do an exhibition that people can look at and something that exercises the practice. It's very interesting to have Tania Bruguera, who is a political artist that sometimes works with people, but especially works with institutions to create, to deframe, or to kind of open the space for other political agencies to occur. I think she does work collectively and collaboratively and so on, but her interest is power. Her interest is breaking down power. And then work with future farmers whose interest is collectives, particularly their own collective, and particularly bringing down the kind of the large space of the political into the politics of personhood, and think of their own experience as a group. It's very interesting to have one next to the other as an exercise. And so the exhibition is 2 parts. This huge stage that we built in Gallery 1, which is a large gallery, where we would think of it as a space of rehearsal of various activities that are about the group itself, social, thinking of almost like a convivial model of future farmers, mapping their collectives and their relationships as a group. And we did a kind of traditional, kind of conceptual project in this gallery. So objects and so on, very pretty. Thank you, Tessar, who's not here. And this is the massive rehearsal space with a sail, thinking of the metaphor of the boat. There was some kinds of labor. There was also a lot of leisure activities or kind of odd activities around cutting wood and so on and so forth. And this is thinking of their objects as relational objects. So whereas Tania is thinking of the installation as a stage set upon which certain sociabilities can happen, is very different to look at future farmers as relational objects, which means that they only really exist properly when they are being used in the context within which they are being used. I have 2 more minutes, or maybe not. I'm not even looking over there. There is Amy, because I haven't even talked about Suzanne. Oh, the donkeys. So the donkeys were very interesting. They wanted to have these 2 characters that we started to think about as so like gallery guides. Completely wrong. Very wrong idea of the donkeys. They had a script every day that they would write down, and then these donkeys would be doing incredibly antisocial things in the gallery. Incredibly antisocial, which is very interesting because now this is the 2nd socially engaged artist that we work with at YBCA. One wants to break down the institution, including this one. I mean, power, Cuba, and so on, but maybe this one too. And that happens this is part of her work, way of being in the world. The other ones have these 2 mediators who are actually really like donkeys, might kick you. They don't communicate. And so it was it's very sort of, it's not just interesting, it's very telling of how these artists think of themselves in relation to the notion of the institution. and how easy it is for all institutions to just simply become that, the institution. I love the donkeys. I thought the donkeys were brilliant. They communicated with each other. They, in various ways, they played games. They were very much like inhabiting a certain ethos of the future farmer. But they were not inhabiting the ethos of sociability, that is a prerequisite of social practice. So they, like Tanya, they also reject, in a way, the idea that they are social practitioners. They think of themselves as part of a different tradition. And then we got finally to Suzanne Lacy, which I'm going to talk even faster. 2 museums, collaborating, working super closely with Rudolf and Dominic for maybe 4 years, 3 years, 3.5, literally every week, every second week and more later. Tanya Zimbardo, Krista, Amanda, who is the editor of the beautiful book, many, many different people, Suzanne in her studio, Unique Holland, Moray Olinsky's working in the archive. The list of people who participated in the creation of this massive exhibition is huge. It's very also telling of the practice that is, for me, the one that really articulates the best the notion of dialogue. But it's not always pleasant dialogue, eh? Let me say. Dialogue doesn't mean that you agree. It means that you maybe talk it through, or maybe you don't talk it through. I mean, dialogue is powerful for that very reason. We end up with an exhibition that has 2 different aesthetics. One which is very conscious and very careful about looking at each project as a distinct set of conditions. I'm trying to avoid saying objects, but. And then ours, which has a very important component, which is that we attempted to do that as a kind of exercise in distributed authorship by very seriously including youth participants through their work with their teaching artists, through their work with the organizations that they are part of, as well as artists. First, in order to think about what it means to do an exhibition, and of course there is Oakland Projects installation, which is led by Unique Holland as the kind of aesthetic voice of the project. And so what it means to do a retrospective of an artist whose work is incredibly collective, but nevertheless has the leading name attached to this. What it means to have labels where you have literally this much in collaborators, and then you have to do your curatorial text that you work for months and months, just 200 words, because no one is going to read after looking at this thing. And so it was very important to do a series of moves different from the other projects, which was, first of all, in terms of the YBCA section, what was very beautiful is that at a certain point, we really, as a team, the visual arts team, decided on many things together, quite literally. Like we would sit down and think about what archival materials together. Krista took immense leadership in defining the parts that are created by the youth participants. Rebecca, Tessa, and John worked very hard with MediaJustice to create that timeline. And so the aesthetic of the piece, the aesthetic of the installation is quite shared. It's clean, it's very clean, but it is very shared. And one of the strategies for me that was incredibly uncomfortable was to actually be comfortable with that. Like to actually say, oh my God, this is super scary. What if it's a mess? I don't know what the kids are going to show, blah, 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 and just be like, okay. Because every time in my position as curator that I attempt or that I have a position aesthetically, in such a hierarchically impossible situation where you're working with youth in particular, and I don't have a relationship to the youth, my thinking was that I would only come as a kind of external voice that would be too strong, too shaping of their presence in the gallery. The other thing that Suzanne agreed very generously, and that was kind of a very complicated thing that we started thinking through many years ago, a couple of years ago, is whether she would have a relationship to the youth and the youth organizers, because she's an expert in this, whereas I am not. I'm a curator. And so the decision not to have Suzanne direct all of the installations was very important and not easy to come by. In the case of Unique and the beautiful, extraordinary Oakland Projects Revisit, I don't remember the title, Unique, sorry. It was different because you have been collaborators for such a long time, but I know that Unique always, over those years, her voice rang in my ear in terms of the entire presentation, which was how create multivocality in a true fashion, where your aesthetic or your sense of how things should be said and when is not overpowering that dialogue. Not only about bringing that to the present in what happened on the roof and what happened in the two roofs and so on, but to actually give the space over. And this is something that we keep hearing as curators in powerful institutions. Our lens is definitive. Whether I am Mexican and that makes me slightly less white, in the United States right now, to give over the space to others to perform in is really important. This is what people are asking for. And this is what I was trying to do here. And that's it. So the one that got the most likes is when, when we talk about the work in social practice, what is the priority? Art and aesthetics or advocacy and activism? Well, I'm sure that everyone else has other answers, but my findings have been that it shifts from project to project and from artist to artist. And especially if the task was to make a retrospective in order to see the kind of profile of each of these practices more clearly within the frame of art and art history, thereby the collaboration with SFMOMA, which became such an important thing because they have access to art history in a way that we don't at YBCA, I believe. I would say that I don't think that there is a, it moved to fourth position. I don't think that it's a question that I can answer from this perspective. I think it's a question I can answer only in a case-by-case situation. For example, Skin of Memory of Suzanne's, which is downstairs, has it's enormously important in the political context and the cultural context of Colombia, and particularly Medellin. People remember it. It has changed the way that policy and public pedagogy function in the country. And here, it's an installation. And it's quite beautiful. And the exercise is to think of the installation. This is what I mean by having an amphibious practice. I don't say that it's always better in the one and the other. And some things are lost in translation, for sure. Oh, one more. Number 9 likes. What happens to the communities that engage with social practice projects once the art is done or abandoned? This is a good question. And I do think, again, this is a question that is a case-by-case scenario. There is, for example, Immigrant Movement International that Tania Bruguera was the leader and organizer and created it with Queens Museum and worked at for 5 years. And then it was given over to the Queens Museum, and I don't really know now under new leadership with Sally. I'm sure that Sally Talent is going to continue it. But it is a very good question. And the question I don't think should be answered from the perspective of art, but we should actually develop tools that come from sociology and anthropology and ethnography to actually find that out. And I know for sure that Krista has been thinking very hard about that, and she has the kind of tools to develop that. Of course, we can say that it is wrong to leave the groups that one works with, and that is also a very important thing to remember in an institution like YBCA that has, in various ways, tried and oftentimes succeeded at creating a commitment to a group of people. Because a commitment to a group of people means that your budgets have to span over many years, right? You have a year budget, but what are you going to do with that if you are running Immigrant Movement International? For how many years do you commit to growing that space? Do you leave it once it is self-funded? How do you, it's endless. So, yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, good. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm very bad at this today, sorry. Okay, I'm introducing the next panel. This amazing group of people, Leticia Hernandez-Linares, who is one of the collaborators in the project, teaching artists at YBCA, and Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary. Unique Holland, who is long-term co-producer and co-creator with Suzanne of many projects, including Oakland Projects and the installation downstairs. Laurie Rubio and Anttwan Stanberry. Thank you very much for being here, and I invite you to the stage.
I guess my mic is on, although I'm super loud, so God bless you. I hope it works out okay. So welcome. It is a beautiful day outside, but it's also very beautiful in here. You're taking my stuff, though? Okay, all right. But it's also beautiful in here because you all are here. Dedicated art supporters, artists, educators, community members, rabble-rousers, right? Am I right? Do I see you? Do I get you? That's good. I want to start by acknowledging the ancestors around us and the indigenous land that we are all on together, in the Ohlone land. I'm also really excited to have this conversation, sort of contribute some prompts, but really I just want to hear whatever these talented folks want to share with us. And so I'm just here to hold some space and take your questions in that old way, as well as in new ways, right? It's a balance. Let me tell you a little bit about who is sitting in front of you. I'm going to give you some snapshots, and if you want to read more details, the bios are online, okay? Unique Holland is a cultural strategist, facilitator, and strategic communication specialist focusing on racial equity and social justice projects. She is the co-founder of Studio Pathways, a consulting firm that provides an inquiry-based approach to culturally responsive teaching and learning. Born and raised in Oakland, as Lucy already mentioned, she is the lead she's a lead artist in the Oakland Projects and has done leadership work and youth work over the past few decades. Welcome. Thank you. Laurie Rubio was born and raised in San Francisco, where she first cultivated her artistic skill as a young member of the Boys and Girls Club. She graduated from Ruth Asawa School of the Arts, from the visual art, where my son also attends, and he's really mad that I just mentioned that, but whoop whoop Asawa Soda, proud mom.
It is what it is.
And she recently graduated, Gloria recently graduated from City College of San Francisco with an associate in arts and will continue to pursue Spanish and linguistics. Linguistics, my goodness. Go ahead. All right. She's a volunteer as an ESL teaching assistant at City College and a civic engagement intern here at YBCA. Wow. So happy to have you.
Thanks.
And Anttwan Stanberry has very sharp fashion sense, as you can see, and was born and raised in San Francisco's Mission District. What? Attended the Boys and Girls Club as well. God, we're so lucky for that resource. It's just so tremendously important and valuable, as these folks and many others can attest to. And developed a passion for drumming and dance in Loco, Bloco, a very important and impactful organization in the Mission in San Francisco. And he has led several different projects and worked with different organizations, including Jamestown Community Center as the Beacon Director at James Lake Middle School. So, beautiful panel. Welcome so much. Yeah. And I wanted to also, oh look. I was so gonna pretend like I had this all on lock. I wasn't even gonna complain about how I really feel about technology. I'm pressing the green button?
Just say next slide.
Oh, next slide, thank you. I just wanted to get a laugh. That was all staged. And thank you, my plant. Thank you so much. Well, as Lucia mentioned, who am I, what am I doing here? I have worked as a teaching artist with YBCA for the last 3 years at Dr. Martin Luther King Middle School in the Portola neighborhood, a beautiful neighborhood, untouched place that has a lot of diversity and a lot of wealth in young people. And some of the things that we have done there, next slide, are a combination of creative writing and visual art. And I've worked in the classrooms there with various visual artists and collaborated and given the youth an opportunity to enter at many different places. Of wherever they're at, they are set up for success. They can fill in blanks, they can write poems, they can draw, they can work off their pictures, they can work together. And that is something that for me is a critical part of my practice with youth. Next slide, please. I've been working with youth since the early 90s when I was a first-generation college student and had not had the benefit of any youth programming. And when I found it, I was like, oh my God, I need to be part of this, and I need to make sure all young people like me, who are the first in their families to be born in this country, know about these things. So that's what drives me and how I came to this work. So this is a very exciting opportunity for me to be part of not only this panel to moderate it, but also that my students' work is in the show. And along the way, I kind of cultivated and articulated a vision for what I do, both as an artist and writer, an educator, and community member. So next slide. And these are some of the beautiful books that YBCA has published with the poetry of young people at MLK, a school that has a very high rate of students who are being underserved. I don't want to say underachieving. It's about what resources they have and what the teachers that are working with them and what they're able to, the kinds of teaching experiences they're able to create there. So next slide. Oh. We'll just keep on going. So let's get started. Now that you've gotten to know us a little bit more and you've heard enough from me, I want to invite the panelists to tell you a little bit about themselves and through what drives their work, why this work, what motivates them, or anything at all that they would like to begin our conversation with. Whoever would like to begin.
Let's go.
Oh, wow, you did that right away. That means not him. Right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Well, I'm fine to kick it off.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's such an honor to be on stage with these wonderful artists and educators. Yeah, I think a lot about what brings me to the work I do now. You can see, if you haven't seen already, in the gallery downstairs. Definitely formative experience and a key to the path that I've taken. I, worked with peers while in school to find various ways to explore who I was as a person, who we are collectively, and identify ways to share that story with those who are open to listening, and sharing that story in an environment that wasn't always open, welcoming, understanding. Very much aware of a kind of a certain kind of identity that was thrust upon us. And so from that path, kind of going into education as an administrator, starting in nonprofits as a leader, and finding that there was something missing about how those institutions relate to young people, and wanting to shift practice there. So the way I approach my kind of creative artistic practice these days is really kind of deconstructing a lot about how our institutions are set up, how we are kind of operating as part of a status quo, kind of keeping things going even though we profess to want change, and doing that through a process of internal investigation, in community with other people, opening up new possibilities. So these days, I work with a team with Studio Pathways, and we use creative processes and arts practices to create learning environments where folks are able to deconstruct their own bias, look at the places where they are working, particularly institutions, but also in relationship and communities and their own families and personal relationships, to identify the places where we have bias, where we participate in behaviors that further this sense of who belongs and doesn't belong, and work to envision new places where we can all belong and be supported, particularly our young people. And this looks differently depending on who we're working with. We work in schools, we work in community, we work in nonprofit, and for business in a number of different ways where folks who are looking to invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion, get to really understand a little bit more about what that actually means outside of the buzzwords, and to do some different, do things differently, starting with how am I being?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
What drives you?
I have some slides here.
Yeah. Thank you for checking in. I was gonna just kind of roll.
I'm like,
okay, there we go.
Does this work? Okay, let's go back. Yeah, I'm Laurie Rubio. I wouldn't be who I am without giving a shout out to my family. So thanks for my mom, my sister, and one of my best friends, Katharina, in the house. And then also my great-grandmother, who's not with us. Love her. She is my one. But yeah, I'm Laurie Rubio. This is me at a speech for the Boys and Girls Club, and that's really where I want to start off. As a child, I was navigating a lot, and a lot of the kids around me were. I went to the Boys and Girls Club Columbia Park off of 16th and Guerrero, and I really needed a place to ground myself, a place to be present, and I realized spending all this time in the art room, because I started there going from age 8 to 18, so you can just imagine how that place influenced me. Picking up the art practice, I realized I could be grounded, I could be present, and that was really important for me and helped me stick with the discipline. But as time went on, I realized I was going through different spaces as well. I had my family at home. I had school, which was often very racially and economically homogenous and people were a lot more comfortable than I was. And then I also went to the Boys and Girls Club, which was super diverse, more low income, but it was so lively. And so there was a lot going on. But I realized as I started making my artwork, growing my eye, and just making more work, that I could access these people. And those preconceived notions of who I was, how I talked, were broken down, and my artwork acted as a buffer, and I could access different groups of people. And that was really exciting for me. And that's why, wrong button. I started getting into work, for example, I was a youth fellow at YBCA, so we worked with the Tenderloin Healthy Foods Coalition here to help stop the food desert thing in minority neighborhoods. So this is in the Tenderloin, and we're trying to bring healthy foods into liquor stores. So let's just keep going. There's that. That's me. Those are my peeps right there. Me at SFI, so I've been in a lot of different programs. Let's see, some of my artwork when I was at SODA, so it is what it is. That's my sister right there. Here you go, sis. Some artwork there, so I realized that once I started showing my stuff, this is at the Boys and Girls Club, that I could just access people, and something that drives me to keep doing my work is that I can bring that to other youth. And working in the city, and I understand where people are coming from. I worked with a lot of different types of people growing up, I feel like, everywhere in the city. And to give youth especially youth of color, but youth a place to ground and feel present and feel like they can be active in creating something is so beautiful to me. And just has transformed who I am as a person. If I can provide that for someone else, that's just what keeps me going and what drives me to move forward. But I just thought this was an appropriate picture to end on. It wasn't necessarily my choice, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I said that. But anyway.
You're in good company.
You're in good company. It's like a reunion. I know people in the crowd and stuff like that. That's great. Yeah, thanks for having me here, y'all. Next person.
All right, so how does this thing work?
Green button.
It's the green one.
Oh, hey. So my name is Anttwan. My last name is Stanberry, not Strawberry. Just putting that part out there.
I didn't say strawberry.
I know, but the
okay,
lady
just
said
clarifying. Okay.
Bring me back to middle school days. So what got me going is the Boys and Girls Club as well. We both went to Boys and Girls Club at the same time, and many years later we're back connected. These are just some of the people that really helped me get to where I am. Ivan Corrado, who's my mentor, he's been a father to me. I lost my mom at a young age, and I was a little bad boy in middle school. Especially when they said the mama jokes, it was over, and Ivan really just kept me in check. Debbie, my therapist, still consider her my therapist now, and Mike and Susanna, they're my hearts. I remember that I was at a panel when I was 11, and they asked me, where do I see myself in 10 years? And I said, I see myself taking Ivan Corrado's job. And here I am now. I'm a director. And with the Boys and Girls Club, they provided a lot of resources, and one of the resources was Loco Bloco. I started Loco Bloco my 9th grade year. They had a summer program, and I decided to show out one day to be the class person in front of the Boys and Girls Club. After that performance, I got invited to perform in front of the Oakland Raiders. I'm a Niner fan, but as a 11-year-old, like, I could perform in front of the Oakland Raiders on their field. Of course I'm gonna do that. And then after that, I got invited to perform for Carlos Santana, the San Francisco Giants, youth exchanges. I'm like, this is nice. Let me stick to this for a while. And it became my passion. So Loco Bloco and Boys and Girls Club both just inspired me to also go to School of the Arts, band geek. And yeah, so more Loco Blocos stuff. It's my best friend right there, Patty. So again, I got the passion of working with kids when I was 11, and it's been my goal just to be a director, have my own kind of nonprofit, and give back to what the Boys and Girls Club gave to me. After I went to college, I worked with Boys and Girls Club Silicon Valley, and I created this group called the Stipe Drumline. So Loco Bloco gave me a set of drums, took those drums to San Jose, started this drum program. No Boys and Girls Club never knew what Brazilian drumming was, and my club had that, and we killed it, right? One of the shows we had, it was like a talent show, and I brought 30 kids deep of 1st through 6th graders. This kid is Elena. She's one of the kids I worked with when she was a 1st grader. 2 years ago, she unfortunately passed away to cancer. And I went to her funeral, and then all the kids I worked with for the Boys and Girls Club came to me, and that's when I knew that I was like, I'm their person, I'm their guy that they need. I'm the guy that Ivan was to me, that Debbie was to me, that Mike and Susanna were to me, and that kept me just going. Same thing, Crystal, it's my favorite picture of her. It's my little homie, She really helped me stay grounded. As a 1st grader, putting someone who's 20-year-old in check takes a lot, and she did that. And then now, when I was done in San Jose, I came back to Boys and Girls Club San Francisco, and that's where I met this amazing lady who was one of the shy kids, the kids that didn't want to do anything. And I saw her one day playing Just Dance, and she would win. And she would win so many times that they made a rule that after 3 wins, you gotta leave. So this kid would win 3 games, go sit down, win 3 more games, go sit down. And I just got inspired by her. And I told her, let's do something. Let's do something unique, which created the Mission Drumline. And same thing, being able to just work at the Boys and Girls Club again in San Francisco where I started, the drumming with Loco Bloco, sharing my passion with the kids, and I got this amazing group of kids performing at Boys and Girls Club San Francisco events. It's cool, And then Alma, who I work with through Loco Bloco, I met her. She was my assistant for Loco Bloco when I taught for Carnival, and she went to college to major in child development because of me. And her telling me that and just shouting me out at her graduation that I inspired her to do the work that I'm doing was amazing. And I love the kids. I think I get paid to have fun, and that's awesome. Yeah, so that's me.
That is awesome. So I heard a few things while you all were talking that resonated back to what we heard from Deborah and Lucia as well. And you said something about buzzwords and about the creation of the work that you're doing to respond to some what you said, the inequities or the sort of the reluctance that so many people have of interrogating bias or being able to talk about it, right? And I heard you, Gloria, talk about developing your eye. I thought that was a really cool, I know you were talking about art, but I think you were talking about more than that. Right?
Yeah.
And then you were talking about this innovation that you've done of like, these are the people who got me here and here's how I'm taking on that role as well, right? And so I'm thinking about the idea of art making change, like what Deborah was talking about, like really believing in that. And I think we're in a room full of people who really believe in that and are all part of it in some way. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that in light of that, the machines that Lucia was talking about, right? Is that this machine of education that we all went through, that we all struggle in, to a certain extent, the machine of the youth work, right? These nonprofit industrial complex, sorry, not sorry, but you know, I mean, so there's the machines and the systems that we're working within are doing their job, right? They're doing their white supremacist job, you know, right? And so we're trying to decolonize that and change some things within, you know? So it's complicated, right? As is my question. My children get really frustrated with me because I like, okay, how many questions are there? There's like 5 in there. So to unpack that a little bit, what are your thoughts about the relationship between your work and bigger impact to, what Deborah said, policy changing or even reshaping the machines or the systems that we're kind of navigating through? And I gave you a hand gesture to go with it.
Can you say the question again? Sorry. I'm trying to process the question.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I got a little college professor for a minute. Let me take that hat off. All right. Plain language. What's the impact of your work? What do you believe the impact can be in terms of bigger, broader change?
Yeah, you know, so I'm glad you asked that question, and it's something that I'm walking with a lot these days. It's kind of like, it makes it a little challenging to be on a stage like this. I was just kind of chatting with somebody on the way in, and it's like, so what have you been up to? What's going on now? And it's this really very disorienting and messy process of unlearning a lot of things, like breaking things completely apart so that I can, with colleagues and with community and others who are really passionate about this work, look at what's in there and be able to go through a process of healing that allows us to be vulnerable enough to build what we can't see. And that's not something that you know, looks cool on a slide, right? So part of that work is contending with past harm, trauma of coming through systems that have been harmful to me as a young person. Then it looks like, what was it to be complicit in those systems as a leader in the nonprofit and public education? Then through apathetic, like, F this is like impossible, like to get to a place to working with others where there can be healing at the same time that there can be generating of new life-affirming work. And I find that the arts to be an essential vehicle for that. For self and then also working with others. And so we focus a lot of our work on the adults who work with young people, those teachers that are locked in classrooms for hours a day with our young people, and the kinds of harmful narratives and perspectives that are proliferated a lot of times unconsciously because we don't have the capacity, the skills to look at those things within ourselves, and then we often lack the political will and support to investigate those at an institutional level. So we like to try to work multidimensionally in the internal, the interpersonal, and the systemic level with the organization that we created, Studio Pathways, and it's really fun and liberating and challenging work all at the same time.
So imagine that we're on a social media page, and then there's that reply. Like, I'm going to reply right now to your statement, because I see some curiosity on the iPad, and I was also wondering myself, can you give a quick example of what some of the activities or work looks like, especially in the using of art?
Sure. So one of the things that we do, we'll go in to create a series of workshops or learning experiences that build on one another. It's moving away from a one-off, hey, we'll come in and do your DEI day long, right? To working with a collective, a school, an institution who have particular goals around, we really want to tackle what's going on in our schools. We see inequity happening. We want to address it. And we create studios within those spaces. So we use visual arts, performing arts to have everyone, our goal is for folks to be able to tap, everyone has an artist inside of them, right? And it's to tap into that creative being. It takes vulnerability, it takes openness, it takes risk, right? Oh, yeah. And these are the things that are stamped out of when we have these processes of sorting and measuring and, you know, putting people in their place, right? So it enables the individual teacher, for example, to have some healing as well, right? To be able to kind of like break apart some stuff and explore. And then we address like, okay, now how is this happening in the places that you engage with young people and with others in community. And it's an ongoing process, but just that's, you know, to give you just a little bit of a hint of an idea.
That's great. There's a whole bunch of likes. I can see them and feel them. Y'all, do you have any thoughts or things you want to share about impact or connection of your work to broader change?
Right. I mean, I look at my work as like something that exists from like, okay, I'm doing this from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Like this is something that's set out, but then there's also just existing and recognizing the people that you share space with, like your neighbors, the communities that you walk through with, the people that you talk to, the people that make your coffee, people that, I don't know, just everyone that you come around with, the people that drive you in your Uber, your Lyft, or whatever. It's like they're all part of your community and they're part of making your existence. And so having key interactions and gathering information from them and trying to impact the lives of people that you come around, I think just starts on the lower level and works its way up through like policy and change like that. So I think for me it's focusing on, okay, who are the people in my community? How can we uplift them in small ways? For example, doing ESL work in City College. A lot of these people that I'm working with, new arrivals and things like that, don't have the ability to communicate. In English, for example, it's like giving people the ability to speak. Those are people in the mission I grew up with all my life. And so having that information, having that access of language is something that can bring up an immigrant population to be more vocal. And then that can affect policy. So it's one thing to be like, okay, like I want to have my work to the side, but then also who am I engaging with? Like where's the immediacy of my work? And how is that taking an effect? So for me, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not just going to do my work from like, okay, my 9 to 5, but which I wish I did work a 9 to 5. Anyway, like, damn.
Be careful what you wish for.
Almost like, you know, anyway, that's a different conversation.
Yep.
But just realizing that we can move up in a small way that starts on that base level. People that are closer to the ground, like our janitors and things like that, like, you know, providing resources to people like, like I have people around me that are trying to learn Spanish, you know, including my mom, which she's doing an awesome job at. People trying to learn Spanish and learn different language. I'm like, okay, like, let me give you some resources. Like, oh, you speak French? I'm trying to learn French right now. So it's like our access, like the way we can access different communities and be like, oh, what do we need? How can we level up together? You know what I mean? Will move us up incrementally and affect and make that change. Because I think everyone, as we can empower each other in small ways, especially through different communities, it's like, wow, you realize how connected people are. And it's like that communication that happens, whether it's through different languages or different skills, that empowers people to talk, to access people, leaders in their communities, and really fight for what needs to be done. And I believe that, you know, once that connection happens, there's going to be that policy change. So I have a lot of faith with people at the bottom, what we consider at the bottom, empowering each other and moving upward together.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. We need a lot of faith.
I think for me is, since working with kids, my goal has been to break the stereotypes, right? Like me being an African-American male, a 6'5" African-American male at that, there's a lot of stereotypes that goes about me that I'm still breaking today. So when I work with the kids, I try to teach them those same ways, right? I love working with the tough to handle kids, the kids that get sent to the principal's office, because if I can work with that kid and help change their way of thinking, their way of behaving, I'm making an impact on that child's life, right? Like I said earlier with the kids that I have performing, I get the kids that are the shy kids, the ones that don't like to talk in public, performing in front of over 200 people now, smiling on their faces, right? And I'm teaching them to, one, don't be afraid to express yourself, be who you are. I think nowadays with the whole social media thing, it's really, the kids now are really just hooked on that. Mm-hmm. And they feel that they need to do something based on what they see on the internet. And I think it was beneficial for us growing up that Instagram, Facebook was not out there. MySpace didn't come out until I was like a sophomore or something like that, right? Like, so that's the other thing that I'm doing with them. Just trying to let them know that you don't have to be the next IG famous person. Be yourself. If you want to be that person to go out in the middle of the street and dance your heart out, be that person. If you want to be that person that wears a freaking banana outfit at school because you want to, be that person. All things that I've done, by the way.
Nice modeling. I like
yeah,
that.
you know. But yeah, I just think that like my goal and hope and passion is that I'm going to teach the kids to just break out the barriers, especially the kids of color.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you so much. I think as someone who took a typing class in middle school, I appreciate that so much, so much. You know, as someone who was driven to this work in part because I didn't feel like I had that access, and I never saw someone who looked like me in front of the classroom or read a book like someone like me until I was an adult. And there was some bitterness about that. Like, why? Why did it take that long that I had to not understand that I too could write a book? And I'm so grateful to live in a place where our schools are doing one thing right, which is definitely, you know, leading the way in ethnic studies, both at the, you know, K through 12 and at San Francisco State, so that our young people can see themselves, because that's really important. And that's a kind of a segue to this question I see here on this device, which is trending. See how I'm, see how, what I did there? That's, yeah. I'm not afraid to evolve and grow. Something that I think we all have faced and have thoughts about. When we talk about diversity and inclusion initiatives, what does it mean when these programs are led by someone who are not POC identifying? I know. Thank you so much for that question.
Wait, can I get that one more time? Just so
Okay, let's go. All right. When we talk about diversity and inclusion initiatives, what does it mean when these programs are led by someone who is not POC identifying?
There you go. I got it. Mm-hmm. Locked in.
Right.
Ladies first.
Want to go for it?
Sure. Oh man, it's like, oh, damn. It's like almost taking a regular. It's like taking history, or man, I don't want to say. Never mind.
Speak your truth. Speak your truth.
No, it's like you know, taking a gender, LGBT class, ethnic studies class, and your teacher's like white, and you know, cisgender white person. You're like, damn, like how am I gonna authentically access this information? Like, can that person really synthesize what they're reading and all this stuff and give it to me in a way that like I couldn't figure out by talking to people in my family and my community? You know what I mean? So I think some of the authenticity of the information can be kind of, yeah, it's not really there. You know what I mean? For me, as someone like, I remember sucking at math my whole life until I had one teacher, African-American teacher, math teacher, and it was like the first black teacher I had. And everyone's like, who is this lady? Da, da, da. And not just the kids of color, but everyone progressed in that class. You know what I mean? Because we had we were able to experience math in a different way, and we're like, okay, like this person, it can hold information, they can hold knowledge. You know what I mean? Because I feel like that's a really, like, oh my God, idea when we see a person of color like leading something. Like, oh man, like they can be a person that holds knowledge as well. Where it's like growing up, like as a kid, it's like, man, like all my teachers are white or Asian, like that, they're the ones that have the real knowledge there. So I think there's a lot of authenticity and a just really special connection that you have when you have, a person of color leading something that's meant for people of color, and that's all that information comes from people of color as well. So it's kind of like, do I have the right to pass on my own lineage? So there's that too, and a lot of the times we don't, including myself, have not felt empowered to do so. Like, are people giving me permission to speak about my own experience? And so when we don't see that, for example, when I don't see that, I'm like, damn, like, we could have got someone else here to pass on their own lineage. It's like, you know what I mean? If I want to, for example, give a drumming class that was based off, like, West African drumming class, like, I want to see someone from West Africa or has that lineage there, passing that on, especially with colonization and everything that's gone on, globalization, all that. It's like we have to keep those connections within the community, and to see someone that, like, you know what, all the BS that happened 400 years, 500 years ago, we're still doing it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So to see that lineage stay forward, like, keep going, and within the community is so special. But when you have someone that kind of like implants themselves in the way that's not always informed, and many times that person's not, all the way with it,
Yeah.
I think you can break that connection. I'm not saying it's impossible, because there's a lot of intersectionality within identities and culture, and then what belongs to who is not something that we can fight over.
Sure.
But I think there's a lot of decisions that inform, like, going into a classroom and being with the community.
I appreciate what you said at the end, Gloria, about I'm not saying it's impossible, because I think this is a very complex question, and it's loaded, especially in the Bay Area. And I know that as an ethnic studies professor at San Francisco State, I understand a lot of what you're saying, and I think it's really important context, and not just the people of color, but everyone sort of knowing what skin they're in and where they come from and how they're approaching the work. And I think that can sometimes lead to, more positive experiences across difference, possibly. But I love what you said about you don't need permission to pass on your own lineage, but you're aware that sometimes it seems like you have to ask. And I was teaching a book called Black Autonomy in a gender seminar in Latino studies, and this book was phenomenal. It was excellent. It was about the Monkey Point area and settlement of African peoples in Nicaragua, and talking about Black Central America, which doesn't get talked about a lot. Nope. And I was dying to know. I was like, I want to know what your identity is, writer, academic lady writing this really fantastic book. And then it got to the point, her name's Jennifer Goet. She identified herself as a middle-class white woman, and at several points in the book interrogated her position, the theory and the advanced critique and analysis that was coming from folks who've never studied theory, but just living a life of struggle and in strength, right? And she did a really good job of expressing humility and also putting herself in the picture and not pretending that it's all good because she was doing this work. And so I just wanted to put that out there as sort of a recent experience I had with some peace around this question and issue that brings me a lot of angst. Not to let anybody off the hook, but just to say that I've thought about this a lot, and so I think there's a lot of feelings and things that might come up here, and I invite either one of you to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you named like some really critical aspects of how the system of inequity perpetuates itself, right? So the kind of the narrative of who, in perspective of who gets to be an authority on something, and then who gets to support that, to kind of co-sign on that claim or that expertise, right? I think this is something that happens a lot with working with youth, right? so that there's someone who's in a position of privilege who gets to kind of name an issue and frame an issue, and then you get a group that can kind of co-sign it, and and then or maybe you work with someone who is your kind of magical Negro, who is able to kind of do that special thing with the kids and get them to do the thing. And it's highly problematic because it's not identifying the source of that the work. It's often not compensating the work, and it is doing absolutely nothing to break apart the system that continues to perpetuate itself. What I've seen in my career is time and again young people coming up into positions of leadership and being ground to dust, being completely worn out from the weight of the work. And what we're looking to do is to address that. And it takes folks working, everybody, it takes working from where you are. And what we try to put out there is, first know where you are, just what you were saying. What's your positionality, right? And if you're down for equity, then what is it that you need to do? Understand about yourself and how you walk in the world, how you hold power, how are you holding on to resources, and then walk that out in your world. And it takes messing up. It takes not looking like you have it all together. These are things that are really difficult for us to do as human beings, to go through this kind of messiness and change. And so, the supportive work of an inquiry-based arts process, we find is something that's helpful to kind of have us walk through this human process of learning and creating something different and new, so that we're not perpetuating these systems of harm.
You want to jump in on anything? Or?
I agree with everything they said.
Okay, great, beautiful. Well, so I wanted to thank you for that rich question, all of you, whoever posed it and those who liked it. I wanted to take a minute and see if anybody wanted to go old school and ask a question. Beautiful, thank you. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your insight and your sharing and vulnerability. I really appreciate that. My question is for Anttwan. I think there's so much to be said about fatherless children and the role that male or men-identified possibility models exist. And so I think, based on what you shared with me, you kind of stepped into this role of people who are stepping into your life and been there for you. How do we combat fatherlessness in our civic engagement when Black and brown people continue to be locked up, deported, disenfranchised in this country? What role does the father figure play in civic engagement and you working with youth?
Nice.
Just that.
I think just being there, again, with the stereotypes, there's a lot of stereotypes about males. We're not in our kids' lives. Males are going to jail. Me just being there and being present for the kids, honestly. And, they're not my kids, but I call them my kids. And I even treat them like my little brothers and sisters, so to a certain extent. I'm not going to cap on you, stuff like that. But, yeah, I think just being there and being present for the kids and showing them that the things that you guys are seeing on TV is not what reality is. The movies that got the Black and brown people in jail, the cholos and cholas, you don't have to be that person because it's in the movies. Be yourself, be unique. And then me as an adult male, African-American male, I'm going to make sure that I'm showing the kids the way on how they should and should not do things. When you get older, you're obviously going to make your own decision. But the fact that I get to be in your life for a certain amount of time, showing you how I learned how to live my life and how I want to teach you how to live your life, that's, yeah.
Thank you, Anttwan. I know that there are a lot of questions about Oakland Projects, and for Unique, does anyone want to ask it directly? Since it's a big part of the show, and there's a couple here trending. You feeling shy? No?
I know somebody got some questions.
Okay, I'll read it then. Let's see. Unique, this question is about the Oakland Projects. What is the most important impact it has had on Oakland and or the region or even the Bay Area? Drilling down.
I don't know that I can answer that.
That's
honestly.
fair.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, so this kind of goes to the question that was asked of Lucia about, you know, what happens when the art is done and it's packed up and goes somewhere else, right? I like to think about this as like, there's nothing that was like necessarily created from dust anew, right? Like, this is about, it's like a process of tapping into something that already exists. Right? So those things remain. So all of the, when you look in the gallery downstairs and you see that timeline of work, right? Like, this is, folk are in their communities trying to get free already, right?
That's right.
So, you know, myself and my good friend Danielle Herman, for example, we've like from junior high school, working, creating little organizations, writing zines, poetry, trying to get on. And then comes a resource from someone who can gather and garner these resources to create a platform for that work to go out, right? And so it's kind of like a touchstone, a moment of framing and igniting, and then stuff continues. So, and what's really beautiful is it's just kind of immeasurable, the ripple that's created.
That's right.
And I think the strongest aspect of those ripples is what folks carry with them, the experience of having gone through something, to be able to kind of connect with someone in a different way, to see something differently. That's really not something that's really quantifiable. But I don't know that the intention of this kind of stuff was ever to be like, we're going to go in and fix things, something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, I definitely see all of you sort of share this this sense of like, I grew here, I found light here, and I want to do that for other people. I identified problems I want to solve, and I appreciate that. I think that's important for us to look back and bring as many folks as we can with us, or to recognize where things are already happening. So that's really important. I want to invite any other questions people want to share out. You're feeling real full and real fed already. You're like really happy and joyous, and you're going to go change the world when we leave here. So then let me take the liberty of asking a last question for you all. What would you say to your younger self? Like, what would, you know, that question of like, what do you wish you knew? I shared that I wish I had, you know, had youth programs, and so I made that by charge to make it happen for others. It doesn't have to be like a Rumi, you know, letter to the artist kind of thing, or not Rumi. Who is it? Rilke. One of the R's. I'm a literature professor, okay? Be afraid. You know, just first thing that comes to mind.
I mean, I'm 20 right now, so.
Yes.
Me too! Oh, wow, really? You had to laugh that hard, okay.
I mean, there is a younger self out there. I mean, in the past.
Yes.
But you know, damn. Start things earlier. I mean, I don't really want to go back and tell myself anything, to be honest.
Okay, then that's the answer.
Yeah.
Right on.
You know?
Yeah.
I think right now it's just okay with being where I am at, and I think that's a really radical place to be at as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You know?
Yes.
To be honest, you know, Anttwan saying, you know, being a youth and like, there's so much social media, which I've never had social media in my life, which has put me on like the odd side out, which is okay. But like, there is, even without social media, there's that push. Everyone feels that push. And so being okay with where you're at and being, okay, that stuff happened in the past, I am where I am now. There's a lot of stuff I've overcome. I'm like, that's cool. And I think right now, and my family agrees, because my family's my all, is like being okay where you're at and moving forward is a beautiful thing. And something that should be cherished. And like, so I think recognizing that at different points in your life and looking back like, oh man, I wish I could have done that, but like, that was golden. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's beautiful too, is just recognizing your present self at different moments and seeing how you change and evolve. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you.
Ladies first. No, ladies first.
You've been using that line, brother.
Yeah.
We're gonna switch it up.
Stay true to yourself. Whatever you're passionate about, do that. If you're gonna be that 11-year-old kid that wants to be a director when you're older, be that 11-year-old kid and have that goal to be a director and work your ass off to get to where you gotta get. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there and always break the stereotypes and the barriers.
I think there's a lot that I would probably communicate, but I think the thing that stands out most for me is I would tell myself, there's nothing that you can say or do that's going to change somebody else's mind about who you or your people are, right? I just remember so much of my life existence being put into trying to convince someone else that I'm okay, that I'm worthy. And if I could have that back and to invest it in the places where I don't have to convince somebody else, they already know, I could just imagine, what would have been.
Wow. Yeah. Woo. I felt that one. Thank you for that. Well, I want to start wrapping us up and just thank you for being such an amazing audience, your questions and your laughter, especially at all the right times for my jokes. That was really good. It's such a pleasure to meet you and hear your words, Unique, Glory, Anttwan. It's a huge honor to moderate and this panel hold space here. So I want to give a very personal and special thank you to YBCA for supporting me as an artist, for seeing me in so many different ways. I started this out at Jamestown or at places kind of on my own, and this has been an opportunity to bring all the parts of me together. So I really want to appreciate this organization and all of you. So with that, I believe we have a break coming up. All right, let's get a big round of applause.